hope you are doing uncommonly well despite your particular circumstances. If you're new here, please click the link in the description box on the channel and go to the post on which I have embedded this video so you can see some scenes around the manse and maybe a summarization of what I have spoken of today. And so I would also like to urge you to get ready to listen to this, get ready to come to class and get dressed up, take care of yourself, comb your hair, and I would like to welcome everyone here, including the young ones that are still home with their parents that are listening for some little tidbit of something that they are interested in. And today I will be discussing a few of the people we read about in old books that might thrill you a little bit, but it would go with homemaking. But dressing up for the homemaking is so important because it shows self-respect and respect towards your maker and to the people within your sphere, within your realm. You're showing respect for them. Don't you dislike it when someone in the family just kind of walks around in their pajamas and then they don't bathe and they smell bad and their room smells bad and and if you say anything to them about it, they get hostile. And so think about that when you are tempted to be ultra casual. I understand there will be moments when you can't, but dress up. But today I am wearing one of the sweatshirts I ordered from Time and True, and the reason that I got some is it's quite chilly here in the mornings, and we often have a squall coming in. And I'm in the Northwest, up in Oregon, and although we have our terrible heat waves and droughts, there is a time of year when I want to dress up, but I don't want to wear a sweatshirt or a t-shirt. I just want a little bit more flair to it, a little bit more formality. And I remember how hard it was for me to adjust from the 1950s into the 1960s, being brought up in the 1950s when people were more conscious, even up at the homestead in Alaska where I grew up, very conscious of dressing well, and we wore jeans and gingham button-down shirts and canvas shoes on the homestead. And when I say gingham, I don't mean plaid. It's the color on white checked garment, and it's not the same as plaid, but we also did not want to wear that into town, and we didn't want to wear it to church. We didn't want to wear it to visit someone, and we were very conscious of getting ready and bathed and dressed up to go somewhere else. And I had such a hard time adjusting as an older teenager when we got into the 1960s and the casual came and no one was dressing up, and it just brought on a sense of sorrow in a way. So that was why I was really glad to find these sweatshirts that have a little bit of this. Kind of looks like one of those leather jackets, Western, and it's made of 100% cotton, so it doesn't get itchy or sweaty or anything like that. So get dressed, and I will tell you, I found a teacup today. Maybe you want to stay long enough to look at my teacup. It matches. And this is from Stuffy Gracie Bone China, which is, you can get these at reject stores, Home Goods, Marshalls, and Ross, and various other things. They're brand new. There's nothing wrong with them, but sometimes these stores are like reject stores where they get last year's merchandise, or maybe the print is slightly off or something, but nothing is cracked, nothing is broken, and very, very good price. And so today I want to start out talking about your homemaking. That's my next subject, is the home and homemaking and how that can help. In the last 7 videos I have talked about sudden changes in the homemaker's life. Somebody has done something that has changed her life in a big way and put a lot of pressure on her and a lot of sorrow, and how homemaking is much more important at that time because it can, at least you can get something accomplished. I heard of a lady who said that when someone in her home was giving her a very hard time, she went outside and she started pulling weeds all around the house and all in her garden, and she got it all cleaned up and it was the best ever. So I learned from that if you get an insult or you get maybe disturbed by something and something is a bit of a worry to you, to go and straighten out something. At least you'll have a house that's ready for company. At least you'll have the dishes done. You'll be ahead. And so this is just so important. The homemaking is part of your morale. It's part of getting your mind settled, and it's part of having a sense of well-being in spite of the trauma that goes on around everybody. And it isn't just the homemaker that gets this kind of trauma, but it does weigh heavily on her. Any kind of family trauma or political trauma weighs heavily on her, because anything that threatens the peace of the home is very, very serious. And I don't think God looks lightly on people who cause a disturbance, especially in the heart of the mother. And so you'll find that these people that are at odds with the rest of the family are not happy either. And but the homemaking is so helpful. Now you remember in Wives and Daughters how Mrs. Hamley and Mr. Hamley were so concerned about Osborne, one of their sons, because he lived kind of a secret life. They didn't know where he was. They didn't know where he lived. When he came home, he didn't tell them what his address was. Oh, that's strange, isn't it? If he didn't have anything to hide, why couldn't he tell them where he was? And then he was starting to use up his inheritance or money that was set aside for them, but he wouldn't tell them what he was using it for. And they weren't angry with him, but it hurt the father especially. It just hurt him because they had been close, and he felt kind of a betrayal because Osborne wasn't being open with him. And so Mrs. Hamley, who had taken to her sick bed, had asked Molly to come and help look after her and just be a companion. And I noticed that they had servants that they hired that took care of the home. And this would have been nice, wouldn't it, if ever you were in some kind of dramatic or traumatic situation, if the housekeepers would come in and straighten up your house. It just kind of settles you a bit. As a matter of fact, when I was growing up, we took a course in our public schools were a little bit different then, and there was a course you could take on looking after the sick in your home, because most of the time when people were sick in those days, they stayed home. They weren't always convalescing in a hospital or a convalescent center or anything like that. So we had to learn how to take care of people in the home. And one of the things that was emphasized is keep the bedding neat and clean, keep the bed made, and then when you bring them trays that have things on them, keep it all neat and tidy. The food has to be attractively set, everything, because it helps the mind, and the mind controls the healing of the body. A lot of times women will go through sudden calamity in their home through nothing of their control outside of themselves. Someone brings in some kind of problem, and it distresses them so much that they start losing their health. They start losing their will to really thrive and to live. And so this is so important, is the homemaking, how much of a difference it makes. And today I'm sitting in my guest room because even though last time you saw it here, it was all done up in red plaid, I didn't have any guests to enjoy it. I took one picture and I decided, well, I'm through with that. I'm going to do something else with it. And so if a guest does come in on me, they're just going to have to catch it at whatever I'm doing with it, because I wanted to do something a little different. And I had all this old stuff. Got to do something with it. And in the manse, there is no storage. We don't have a garage. We don't have a proper storage area where things could stay dry. So everything has to be used. It has to be out. I have several layers of tablecloths on my table because I don't want to fold them up and put them away and then have to get them out and iron them. So they just stay on the table and in a big stack. And it's the same with bedding. As much as I can get on the beds, I will, because I don't have to store it. And so I wanted to share this guest room with you, and I stealth camped on all the beds in these rooms where my children used to sleep, and because they don't come in the winter, and I stealth slept on all of them and had such terrible nights that I got up in the night and ordered new mattresses each time I was experiencing a discomfort. And thanks to your contributions, I was able to get new mattresses for all the beds. And now I'm going to recamp and try out the new mattresses. But I think everybody should do that because we hang on to things, all I do, so long, even after the children are gone, and don't think that those might not be too comfortable right now after all this time. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Osborne in Wives and Daughters today. So here's the problem: is that the parents loved him so much, but he'd stopped, kind of distanced himself from them, and they wanted to know what he was up to. And the father thought, Mr. Hamley thought, that he was spending his money on gambling, and he'd also borrowed some. So it was very disturbing, and they couldn't get any forthright answers from him. And it was wearing on Osborne too. Osborne started to be unable to breathe very well. And this is what happens when there's secrets and there's the secretive drama that's going on. You have to watch the, I don't know if you want to call them the prodigal, or the one that has left home but won't give you any information. And you're not quite sure what they're up to, because the health is wearing on them too. And better just pray that they can come home, and you can keep an eye on that, because most of the time when someone leaves home, they get sick, and they are sick at heart. They're extremely lonely. They've gotten themselves in a situation they can't really back out of because of commitments to businesses, to payments, to people, and other relationships. And sometimes they are just like Osborne. It was just eating at him that he couldn't tell his father that he had a wife and a child and that he had met her in France, because while he was growing up, his father was always going on and on about the French. And I believe this was written in the early 1800s, and he was saying, in my day we were content to beat the French, to hate the French, and to beat them at land and at sea. And so I don't think he was that cold-hearted. If he'd been a French person, he probably would love them, but he that was his political opinion. And so his son had married a French woman, and was afraid to say anything about it. And of course, after Osborne passed away, his father grieved so hard, and then he found out about the wife and the child, and he was so overjoyed that there was the child's mother and the child, that he took them in. But I wanted to tell you about this because how secrets. And then Molly, remember in the previous video where I told you that Molly was caught in a situation with her stepsister Cynthia because she had to keep a secret about her secret engagement to Mr. Preston, and which she had Molly hand a note to him and break it off. And now Mr. Osborne, he's told Molly about his wife and child because he wanted someone to know where they were in case something happened to him, because he knew he was quite sick. And so now here's Molly. She knows something. She can't even tell her father because she was asked to keep it in confidence. So it's sad, people want you to keep so many things in confidence, and but there are some people that probably should know some of these things. But it just ate away at Osborne. I think that was part of his problem, was that he could not be forthright with his father, or he felt he couldn't. And so I wanted to bring that up to you, because if you are still suffering from having someone in the family that you're intensely concerned about, and especially about their health and their state of mind, a lot of these people are not in their right mind when they do something quite drastic or out of character of themselves. And so you need to spend time getting yourself dressed up and get as good looking as you can. I remember one time somebody told me they thought I was rather odd looking, and I said, God must have a sense of humor. He makes some of us odd and some of us even. So just do the best you can with what you have, okay? We don't all have perfect everything. And but God loves us, and the proof of it is we're still living. And I woke up this morning and I was just thrilled because I was alive. And so when you get vital, you start thinking about that more. And I was going to also, since I'm talking about homemaking right now you can get on YouTube, on the web, and you can find many homemaking videos that are just wonderful. There's a lot of young women who have wonderful videos about things I've been watching some about young women who put something on about how a list of things they wish they had known about homemaking or about taking care of people in the home family. And I've been watching those. Those are just really good, and I wish that I'd had that when I was growing up. When I was growing up I was a young girl in the 50s and then a teenager in the 60s, like 13, just still very young. And most of the women started going to work, and the women in the church started going to work, and absolutely the preachers would preach against it, but they didn't quote Titus 2 or 1 Timothy 5:14 or anything about women at home and so these women were going to work, and so here I was and a lot of women my age looking for some kind of example of what we might try to do to prepare ourselves for the home and for our own families. And it not being there, I began to look into a generation before and before that and before that, and found so many interesting things from the Victorian era because most women were home-based. There wasn't the amount of tugging at them to leave the home. And one of the things that I liked was going to, I don't know if you want to call them show homes, but they were historic home tours, and you'd go in an old Victorian house and they'd show you where this person wrote their letters and where this person made their list and where they brought in their food and where their little kitchen garden was and stuff. And it was all, what impressed me about it, it was so home-based. The homes were built and the little rooms were built. There'd be one that would catch a certain light or sun a certain time of day, and you would think, oh, well, this is where she would sit and do her mending. And then there was the fireplace, and it was all designed with it in mind that these people were going to be there. They were going to function there. They had their little writing desk. They had everything they needed. They had their own private libraries. They had the kitchen, and they had the pantry, and when I was growing up, we did not have pantries because most people got case lots of stuff, stored them in the shed, and just went out and got what they needed. But basically, in large families, I'm from a family of 9, in large families, we pretty much ate everything, and the pantry would have had lots of standing and sitting room. And so, but these old houses intrigued me because they were done with pretty wallpapers and beautiful furniture. It might have had a little more design in it than we have today. And generally, people who are not in a hurry have time to sit down and enjoy the chair they're sitting in, enjoy their writing pen, and enjoy the letter paper they're using. But people that are in a hurry and they're ultra busy outside of the home want everything sleek and uncluttered and nothing in it to take care of because they are not going to have time to do that. And I remember reading about I'm forgetting what the group of people they called themselves. It was the up-and-coming young people that were getting into their 30s. They didn't want anything. They did not want a house. They did not want furniture. They did not want clothes. They just wanted, and they really didn't even want a kitchen in their house because they were not going to use these things. They weren't going to prepare food. They weren't going to really, quote, live at home. And so their life was going to be out there. But so I went back to the Victorian era because I had photographs of my great-grandmothers and had actually written to them when I was 16 years old, had kind of known my grandmothers because I wrote them letters. They wrote letters back to me. And I never found any of them. I don't know what I did with them unless they just got destroyed because we had moved or something like that, but I still remember the care these great-grandmothers took to write to me, and I have photographs of them from the 1800s. And so when you get ready to look back, if you're young and you're watching this or listening to this, when you get ready to, and by the way, I hope that you are being busy while you're listening. There's nothing else to see here. And you're looking for someone to kind of be an example so you can start building your strength to become the woman at home or the older woman, then I would suggest that you start with a little bit of just analyzing what you would like to be and what you would like to do. You can't always find that person, but one of the easiest ways to start being more diligent in homemaking, first of all, there are some things that you can change more easily than other things. You might say, this is so daunting, I'll never learn to bake bread, I'll never learn to really manage my housekeeping and everything, but you can at least begin to take care of yourself and then start doing little things like taking care of your house. And one of the things I found the most encouraging was to take what I had and do what Emily Barnes did in her book, The Spirit of Loveliness, and her homemaking books, was she would just take what she had and she would just take care of her house in more of a decorative way. That might not suit everyone, but it cheered me up. And then if I wanted to be an example, at least my house would be somewhat presentable. At least maybe a couple rooms would be somewhat presentable, and at least I'd have that sort of behind me, so that if anyone was watching me, I'd have at least some housekeeping principles, and I would be able to be somewhat of an example. But I think it's important to be an example to yourself and to your children, and a reflection of God's beauty in your home. I did speak to you last time about the stuffy house syndrome. I've changed it now. It used to be the creepy house syndrome. Well, now it's the stuffy house syndrome. And I said, Eureka, I think I've found it. Well, someone sent me a link to an article in an online paper that talked about house-itis and how people, just because they're home more, they're doing everything at home, even getting groceries delivered to the home, they're starting to get, we used to call it cabin fever in the old days up in Alaska. And it causes you to do crazy things. Cabin fever, for instance, if you'd been cooped up for several months and snowbound, you would exemplify this cabin fever by getting up and going outside and just kind of wandering off without a jacket or anything, because it had affected your mind so bad. And stories were told of people found in the snow that were half frozen and having to be brought back to their house, and because you didn't know what you're doing. So I began to read more of this, the Jane Austen Diet by Brian Kozlowski, and I was quite fascinated and cheered up by his chapter on free air. And so I got to thinking about my own house and when I felt this creepy house syndrome and why I would feel that way. And I discovered that it might have something to do with the house being closed up. And some of these articles that I read online were talking about how our homes have so many chemicals in them. And I'm talking about in the walls and in the carpets and in things that we have. And that when it's all closed up, all this stuff just starts to create this stuffiness and can affect your thinking and also create anxiety. And I was thinking also that when you wake up in the morning, some of you have anxiety maybe first thing in the morning and you can't figure out what happened. Well, when you think of it, that house has been closed all night. So this morning I got up and it was just hit my mind that maybe I should open the door. And of course, if you tend to get low body temperature and get chilled, that's not a good idea. But I believe that it's possible to at least close a door in one room and open a window there. Let that room freshen up. and then close that window, open another room, close the door, and freshen all those things up. And if you need to open the front door to the front room, you could always go into another room that's a little warmer while you do that. But yesterday, see, church was yesterday. It always happens after church. Well, then I remembered that the house had been closed up for several hours, and I would come home and I would think, is there something wrong? Because I just had a wonderful time and I saw people I like and we were singing joyfully. We had a good worship service, and I'd come home and it would just be so eerie. And I tried all kinds of things. I'd say, well, let's go out to lunch. So we'd go out to lunch and come back and it was still there. Well, what happened was it was closed up more. I was just closing it up to leave, and then I'd have to come back and it was still there. And I thought something weird was going on. But I have started leaving a window open, and I also start to open up the house in the mornings if the weather is good. If not, I close off rooms and open the windows. And I had never thought of that, but I remember back in the olden days how people used to step outside. They'd be washing dishes for a while, but the kitchen was arranged so that there was a door there and they could just open it up to kind of step outside for a while. And how we don't do that. We don't do a few tasks and then step outside. And in Brian Kozlowski's book, he talked about how being outdoors or having free air, you can have a window open, but it's not the same as being outdoors in the free air, is essential to them, because they had I concluded that they had as much free air as stale air, or maybe more free air. And he quoted some times when they were very sad because they had to be indoors because it was raining. So, and when you think of it, I went to the grocery store yesterday and I thought of it, how I closed the door on the house when I left, and then got in the car and closed the door. So there I am in another interior, and then got out of the car, went straight into the grocery store. Very few steps and very little outdoor free air. Got back in the grocery store, the doors are closed, and who knows what kind of air is circulating in there. And thinking, oh my goodness, we're not really aware of this, and that's why some people really like the open type markets, because they can walk around in the free air. And what an effect it has on you when you have not had the free air. And there's where that stuffy house syndrome may be coming from. So we end up, we think we need to get out of the house. Remember that? Women need to get out of the house, so they go out to eat with their husbands, or they go somewhere and they just go from one indoor area to another indoor area. And so you go get groceries and you're back in the car, and then you're back at home. And it so often happens that there is more indoor air than experienced than the free outdoor air, the free air that's circulating. So I want to read some of Brian's book here that's on that subject. And I'm hoping that this will be a bit shorter today. It's very hard for me to get here. There's always so much to do, and I'm always hoping before I die that I can get everything caught up so that my descendants won't have to go through all this stuff that I'm going through. So I'm going to read a little bit of this. And if you don't live in a country area or an area that has much nature around it, you can create your own nature with whatever you have, whether you've got a little front door planter box, or whether you've got a tiny little backyard. No matter where you live, you can create by planting the things that attract birds and butterflies, and that way you've got your country sounds and you have the country sights. You can do so much. And I remember staying in a little, I guess you would call it a park one time, where people have these little units, and they had created, every little home was so beautiful because they had created what I would call the hanging gardens all around their little units, and created beautiful, beautiful atmosphere and countryness there. So here is on page 156 from Brian Kozlowski's book, The Jane Austen Diet, There is nothing so refreshing as a walk. Now, why do we like Jane Austen? Well, a couple of her books were the disturbance, any disturbance or drama they had in them wasn't so shocking that you would stay up all night, because it wasn't a horror show or anything like that. I remember when books changed. You could read a book back in the 50s and it would take you, to a certain conclusion, and you could pretty much have faith that it was all going to be all right. But then in the 60s, they started bringing in books and novels that were so shocking that you couldn't finish them. But with Jane Austen, you can trust that, and also with Elizabeth Gaskell, you can trust that they want a happy ending. And in fact, they often made people like the villain, the so-called villain. Towards the end, you could forgive them. They were redeemable, and they did the right thing. So there is nothing so refreshing as a walk. If Austen characters have one biological motive for walking more, it's literally in their minds. This is a lot to digest. I think about these things when I'm going on my Jane Austen walk, my Regency walk. Walking appears to magically boost and balance their mental health. I decided this morning when I went on my walk to just listen to something, just to see what I could hear. And way off in the distance, someone has a rooster. There are crows around. There are a tremendous amount of chirping birds, and one of them is the chickadee. Very interesting. And the noises that are around, besides the tractors. You come out to the country to get some quiet and peace, and then there's all kinds of tractors and grain trucks, and all the industry is all around you. But I woke up early enough and it was still not very light and very foggy. We had a kind of a squall that came in, and it was rather dark, and I decided, nope, I'm not going to get depressed about this, because this is a fresh air experience. This is a free air experience. And I heard so much and saw so much and was so grateful for it that I just stopped in the middle of the field and thanked God for the privilege of being able to walk and breathe, and just breathe the air, and be able to see the beauty. Interesting about the scenery is that God changes it every day. It's never exactly the same. There's never the same cloud in the same position. There's never the sun shining in the very same pattern on anything. And so that's why I say, you can change your clothes and get dressed up, and you can have a cup of tea in a different teacup, because even God changes things all day long. And it's never the same blade of grass. It's always the seasons change. And some of you that aren't in a seasonal place, He does change the air and the weather in. So I said, walking appears to magically boost and balance the mental health. Now, if I were going to provide some kind of relief for women who are stunned and suffering from some kind of disorientation, I would include the walk. But it wouldn't be. I noticed I went for a walk the other day with two young women, really young unmarried women, and they were like in their early 20s, and how fast they were walking. And I didn't want them to think that I was too vital, so I made an attempt to keep up with them, but I had trained myself not to do that. Just to, they go on this fast walk, and I know they're doing it for their health or other reasons, but I am just going to walk very, very slow, because I want to take it all in. And I think even when we have our children at our feet, our little children, we ought to make them walk slowly. We ought to just walk through very, very slowly and start looking at things and picking things up and making a little nature collection. And so these girls and we picked up interesting rocks and pine cones, and we even brought in some herbs, wild herbs, and a couple of feathers and some other things. Stuck them in a little bowl on the front porch. We thought we were so clever. And sometimes you have to buy these things in packages, and we just thought we were so smart. And so it balances your mental health. Jane makes countless. The other thing that they were doing that I trying to train myself not to do is um, keeping a lively conversation going. That's hard to not talk when you're walking with friends because they think you're in a mood or they think you're mad at you. So walking alone and with your children is good to tell them, okay, let's just be real quiet going through this part. Let's nobody talk and let's just see what we can hear and see and observe and feel. Jane makes countless references to moods, feelings, spirits being cheered and freshened by the walking. It's one of her most reliable physiological litmus tests. Austen characters who walk more are measurably happier than those who don't. People who are not in the habit of walking, much like Mrs. Bennet, tend to have gloomy thoughts, while others, like Lizzie, naturally turn to walking to alleviate stress and anxiety. Now, this is such a good point because I talked about that creepy house syndrome. And when I read this, it said people who are not in the habit of walking tend to have gloomy thoughts. Well, I thought that might not be scientific, and this is such an old written. Didn't she live in the late 1700s? Somebody writing about that. How would they know what the creepy house syndrome is? And which I've changed now to stuffy house syndrome. But when I read that, people who don't go for walks tend to have gloomy thoughts. Well, that's that oppressive, uneasy feeling that sometimes I would get after I had been away from the home and I came back in and I thought, well, there's something missing and it just feels eerie. The house had been closed. And so when I started taking these walks, I thought about this and I thought maybe it might be something I would include if I were to provide some kind of relief or comfort for the person who was suffering from a stunned shock in their lives, and how I would include that as one of the things that we would do, or I would send them on their own on a certain route with a piece of paper with it. But I would think it'd be better to accompany them, and I have several other things on the list that I would include if I were to provide some kind of stress relief for someone. And maybe today you would like to do that. Maybe that could be one of my homeschool assignments. While others, like Lizzie, naturally turn to walking to alleviate stress and anxiety. She walked up and down the room to compose herself. That is something people used to do, but in later life, in the last couple of decades, I've heard people say, will you please sit down? Will you please settle down? Why are you walking back and forth through the house? Well, that's okay. They're supposed to do that. It's not natural to sit all the time. It's probably not good for your mental health. So if you have anxiety, then you might try getting up, just getting up and walking around your house. It's amazing what good it can do, and all the things you see and think of as your brain clears up, how delighted you can feel. And you'll end up thanking God for putting ideas into your mind of your worth and what you can do for Him and for others. She walked up and down the room to compose herself. It's Austen's acknowledgement of an ancient belief, the concept that walking can effectively clear your head, and one dating back to Greek philosophy. It is solved by walking. It went the classical motto. But I believe probably in the Psalms there are plenty of references to the word walking, although it's used in a symbolic sort of figure of speech, like I will walk within my house in a perfect way. It just in a perfect with a perfect heart. It just means conduct. But you could use that, as you walk through your house, because it doesn't have to have just one meaning. But it wasn't until 1999 that this belief was scientifically confirmed. A landmark study by Duke University found that quick walking for 30 minutes 3 times a week was just as effective as antidepressants in relieving the symptoms of major depression, and, over the long term, even more effective than medication. An almost identical claim is made by Jane Fairfax in Emma. Quick walking will refresh me. We all know at times what it is to be wearied in spirits, maybe we just never understood that. We watch all these Jane Austen movies, we read the books, and we see these phrases but don't relate to them. Maybe that's what it is, the stuffy house syndrome, just being wearied in spirits, but it can be from the stuffy air, which has all kinds of stuff in it that will cloud your thinking. Moreover, the same Duke University study discovered that walking tends to boost people's confidence, giving them heightened feelings of self-regard. Have you ever had such a day that maybe there were over insurmountable things that you had to think about, or people doing things that saddened you or grieved you, and you got this feeling of self-loathing? Because he says walking tends to boost people's confidence, giving them heightened feelings of self-regard. You feel a self-loathing, and because you're taking in so much of this grief and this unhealthy thinking and the bad stuff other people are doing, you can actually start to feel a sense of self-loathing. What I would suggest you do, if you're feeling this self-loathing and not being what I would call worthy, you feel kind of unworthy from all the problems surrounding you, and especially if you feel it when you decide to retire at night, and all these things start flooding in, I would suggest you not go to bed. Just get up, walk around for a while until you get the strong feeling of he said self-regard, probably what we would call it is worth. And so let me continue here. Is it any coincidence that the most iconic walker in Austen world, Lizzie Bennet, is also the most iconically self-confident? Remember, she said, my courage rises with every attempt to intimidate me. And instead of being knocked down by some kind of bad mood, by some kind of bad news, by insult from someone, by someone undermining the success of your home life and family, or some of these things that happen to us that people do, remember Elizabeth Bennet, my courage always rises with every attempt to intimidate me. Remember, I said that when I got insulted by the haters back in the day, when we first began using the internet, they would say, they would try to intimidate me in getting off of the web and, writing all kinds of hit pieces on me, and I would think about Elizabeth Bennet. Well, okay, you don't like what I wrote, I'm just going to write twice as much next time because you kids need to learn something. So I would just laugh, and it's hard for some people who are really empathetic and sensitive not to take on other people's bad manners. They feel like that they're somewhat responsible, or they feel very guilty for them, or they somehow take it on. I guess that's one of the things that sympathetic people do. And that is one reason why walking is so good, is you can just shrug off some of that. I remember our kids used to laugh at us when we went for walks, because we'd say after a dinner, let's go walk off our dinner. They would make all kinds of jokes while we were all walking about how, okay, I'm shaking the meat off of this leg, and I'm shaking the mashed potatoes off of this leg, and let's shake our arm and shake off the green beans. And make fun of the phrase, let's walk off our dinner. I don't know, do you still say that? I guess that reveals our vitality. I should be glad to take a turn. Now, we'll see in several incidents in some of Jane Austen's books that in evening, when you couldn't go outside or bad weather, they would take a turn around the room. They would just walk up and down the halls or walk around, and they probably had small spaces too, probably as small as the manse in some respect. And I made myself a route, and I thought, well, I don't care what anybody thinks, even when the descendants are here, I'm going on my walk. And I'd walk around the house and walk around everywhere and check on everybody, go to every room, and then meet someone in the hall and say, other way, Mr. Collins, and really enjoyed my walk. And they knew what I was doing. While a nice long walk is a lovely treat in Austin world, even Regency schedules didn't always allow for them every day. The accomplished woman has to improve her mind by extensive reading sometime. So when compelled to sit for long periods, now remember I said if you've sat a long time and you're starting to get these sinking feelings of wearied thoughts and wearied spirits, just to get up and see what happens. When compelled to sit for long periods, Austinites rely on a handy trick to keep them frequently on their feet, taking a turn. I'll try to explain this without sounding hopelessly disconnected from modern reality. Taking a turn is merely rising from your chair and pacing around whatever space is at your disposal. Here's Carolyn Bingley's explanation in Pride and Prejudice. Let me persuade you to follow my example and take a turn around the room. I assure you it's very refreshing after sitting so long in one attitude. I suppose that means in one position. To quickly vindicate both of us, taking frequent turns throughout the day has indeed been shown to refresh you on a biological level. Even just 2 minutes of light walking for every 20 minutes of sitting significantly reduces both blood sugar and insulin levels, two things always dangerously out of whack when sitting for prolonged periods are your blood sugar and your insulin. Yes. Remembering the Regency wisdom of taking a turn is especially crucial for desk workers like me. So 3 cheers to anyone clever enough to invent the app we've all been waiting for, one that periodically pings on our desks with Caroline's sassy voice. Let me persuade you to take another turn around the room. Yes, see, there's so much room for invention. There's so much scope for the imagination. Kids, you could do things like this. I do know a lady who has a watch that rings when it's time for her to get up, and she's lost a lot of weight just because she's getting up and walking around. It doesn't say anything clever like Caroline. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Well, you could always get your old mother to call you on your phone and say, let me persuade you to take another turn around the room. You could get your daughter to call you and give her a chance to boss you around, which they don't get to do very much. And so, I think I'll do that. At least you'd hear from them. You could call them and say, I've helped you all your life. You could help me. Could you call me and tell her what times you want them to call and say this to me? That way you could keep in touch. Okay, the whole country abounded in beautiful walks. It's unanimous. Austin characters prefer exercising outside. I did that this morning. I took my little phone out that had the place where I look for I just do a 5-minute exercise. And as long as it's a standing exercise, I'll take it out on the deck and set it out there and do all I'm sure that the tractors going by think I'm waving at them when I do all the hand signals and reaching up in the sky and everything. They really think there's someone enthusiastic about them. Whether it's scampering about the country, walking along garden paths, or climbing the hilly downs, rejoicing in their own penetration at every glimpse of blue sky, there's some blue sky. Do we teach people to do that? That would be one thing that would be on my list of things to help bewildered women who have just suffered some kind of a shock that has disoriented them. A plan to clear their mind would be to look for some blue sky. We'll go for a walk and we'll look for certain things for some blue sky. Now, so it's, to clear their minds for their day at home. And that's not because Jane didn't have access to a gym. The Regency-era, in fact, had its fair share of indoor exercise options. There was the chamber horse, for one, a bouncy exercise chair that hilariously mimicked the up and down motion of horseback riding. There was the Regency version of the treadmill, walking in endless circles in indoor spaces, like the pump room at Bath. Catherine experiences its mind-numbing dullness in Northanger Abbey. Yeah, they had the same kind of exercise people do that walk the malls or, walk in certain places. Catherine experienced it, and she said, every morning they paraded up and down for an hour, looking at everybody and speaking to no one. Most tedious exercise in Jane's novels. For good reason. Countless studies have confirmed Austen's intuition that fatigues within doors are worse. People who swap out the gym for the great outdoors consistently find exercising more pleasurable, more invigorating, and less tiring than performing the same exercise indoors. The TVs, air conditioning, and giant mirrors of indoor gyms simply can't compete with the residual health benefits of getting outside, where the opening of the trees gives the eye power to wonder. Oxygen, lots of oxygen, naturally. Where the nuance effects of natural light and fresh air act like the ultimate energy drink, something of deep significance to Jane, which we'll explore at the upcoming chapter, A Taste for Nature. So I'm going to include the energy drink. It means you gulp in the air. When I provide some kind of relief day for women who need a little less trauma, so to clear the mind. And so we're going to go into the free air, and we're going to listen, and we're going to also see when we come back, write down any ideas, maybe even take a notebook with us, and they might even take their little art journal with them. And so other things that I want to tell you. So I'm here. I'm just going to put this back. I wanted to show you the little art trading cards that my granddaughter makes for me that I use for bookmarks. And she puts these in letters. She just hand draws them, and I use them. I need like 1 million bookmarks. So I was looking at these just to wind up here. I was looking at these Hints on Household Taste by Charles L. Eastlake, and I believe it was written about the Victorian era, and I'm trying to see what the date was. It was reprinted in 1969 from 1864. So I was looking at all this, Hints on Household Taste, and they used such old things and old patterns and stuff that I was thinking as I was looking through this. It's not any use to moderns. Everybody needs to have a little notebook called Hints on Household Taste, where you can tell the next generation what worked for you and how to make home have, I guess they call it good taste, how to make the home pleasant. And I used to take my children on the historical home tours because I wanted them to get a feeling of what life was like when people were home-based and more home-based, and to just get a feeling of it, where they'd have, we'd notice the sleeping porches, and we noticed how important air was to them, and we noticed the landings at the top of stairs, whereas now everything's so tight and concise, and how you could go up the stairs and there was a landing area. You have a little bit of a rest. There might even be a seat there. But you could write your own. You could just put it in a notebook and write your own. And I'll never forget the mother who told me that she had been sick. And while she was sick in bed, she decided to, in a notebook, tell the children how to clean the bathroom. So she would write every little detail down. Take everything off of the sink. Put it here, or put it in this basket. And then spray this water with soap on it that I've made, or tell them how to make it, and then take this and clean it, and then put everything, clean all these bottles and things and put it all back. She just made this how to clean the bathroom, and then she did how to clean the kitchen, so that if she ever got sick again, they could just take over. And everybody should have their own instructions. And then I was reading the Butler's Guide to managing the table and running the home, and it too didn't have anything for us today. And I mean, it had a few things, but we don't do it. But the one thing that I liked that I found today was how to hold a dish. Now, it always disturbed me that people will hand you something from the table and they'd have their thumb in it. I never liked that. And I've seen people even at restaurants serve you with their thumb in the dish, and I just don't like that. And so what they do is they show you how to hold it so that your fingers don't ever get in the dish. And that was helpful to me. But for the most part, it was it was about how he was a butler in one of a household that was related to the royals, and what to do with table linen and how to brush a felt hat and stuff. And we don't do any of that. So I was thinking how, and I looked up on the videos on YouTube that were available on, how to be a butler in your own home, or how to be a housekeeper in your own home, and found some very good ideas and very good things. And but I think everybody should be able to write their own. You ought to be able to do your very own thing. And so I just encourage you all to do that stuff like that. You can also get these things, if you write something, you can get it printed and bound and sent to you. Just order it from a self printer, self publishing, or publish it yourself. And my kids write books for each other, and then they go to, I believe it's lulu.com or some of these other places, and they print, publish, and they get it all published, and then they order them for each other. And you don't have to sell them, you don't have to make them public either, but it's nice to have a book that has a nice cover and is bound. But you can also make your own, with your own printer. And this also had a little segment on ironing boards. Now, I keep my ironing board and iron up, and a lot of people don't. And when people come into my home, there'll be a room with the iron and ironing board up, and I don't know how many times I've had people ask them what that was, because it's so unfamiliar now. But because I sew, and because I don't have a dryer, I do have to iron a lot more. I am getting a washer and dryer. It's just the person that is going to give me theirs, which is practically brand new, they're waiting to sell their house, and then we'll go get it. But so I keep the iron and ironing board up at all times. And he had a little segment on ironing board. Ironing boards. One of the first ironing boards I remember seeing upon entering service is what it's called when you work for royalty and you are a butler. Service was an actual board propped up between a table and a chair and covered with a blanket. I don't know how many times I have taken. Before, they used to have, they have iron and ironing boards in hotels now. Did you know that? Hotels and motels. And one time we stayed a weekend in a hotel in the middle of a terrible, hard winter because my husband had an appointment there, and a church appointment. He was going to preach for this other congregation in the absence of one of the preachers. And so we stayed a weekend there. So I brought my sewing machine with me and the fabric. I wasn't going to make myself sew, but I thought, well, if I have the time and the inclination, I will. I was so glad that ironing board was there. And so I was able to press as I sewed. So ironing boards. One of the first ironing boards I remember seeing upon entering service was an actual board propped up between a table and a chair and covered with a blanket. Any flat wood surface can in fact be used as an ironing board. I have often taken a bath towel, folded it several times, and laid it on any surface, a table, a coffee table, the kitchen counter, anything, and the thing that needed to be ironed, I was able to press it fairly well there. The only thing that you have to remember is that iron is going to have hot steam in it, and so you can't put it on plastic. You can't iron on top of something that's covered in plastic, or a plastic piece of plastic furniture of any kind. It has to be hard surface, and that's why you put the padded towel there, is to protect it. A sleeve board is handy for putting a finer finish on dress or shirt sleeves. I don't have one of those. I have thought about getting one though. And a commercial ironing board is useful for turning out dresses and skirts. But I still prefer to iron my clothes on a table, which is what I feel I need. He's such an antique. He worked in the 1930s as a butler. that he feels more comfortable just putting something on a table. The wood, of course, must be covered. I lay a blanket down as a pad and cover it with a sheet. This gives a smooth surface and protects the garment from fluff. Yes, I think I learned to do this. If you have an iron, you can still iron if you have make a pad that protects the surface and protects your clothes too. And I think I've forgotten, probably learned that from my mother. So he goes on to tell how to iron certain things, but we don't iron anymore. But I do iron the cotton cloth that I sew, and then I iron my husband's shirts because they have to hang to dry now, and they're a little bit more wrinkled. So, ladies, I hope that you got a few things done while you were listening, and that you will come back. I love your comments, and I do read them all. I'm sorry if I don't get around to answering them all, but I wanted to thank you for your prayers, and I wanted to thank you for all that you do for me, and that you make possible for me to do, and that you are on board with homemaking and very supportive. And so I will say God's blessings on you and see you next time. Bye.